the tarot is an amazing tool to kind of find your way forward,
Mhm.
to kind of light the path that you're moving. And it has been for me throughout my life. So it's not something I just teach, it's something I use daily, and have used it for clients for, when you say 40 years, that was kind of professionally for 40 years. And I guess it's now 40 plus years because it's still happening. But yeah, if you know what you're doing with it, and that's the kind of the big question mark that's around tarot. But if you know what you're doing with it, it is an amazing tool for kind of transformation, coaching yourself, coaching others, insight, as well as kind of the ability to kind of look into the future. That kind of is part of tarot as well.
Richard Knight, welcome to Fear Unzipped. I'm so
I'm
delighted to have you here.
really happy to be here as well. Good to
Oh,
see you.
you're an important person in my life, which I will share with you in a little bit. But just so people know about you, you are probably one of the world's greatest tarot readers. You are. Did you do psychotherapy? Do you also combine it with psychotherapy?
I have 2 degrees in psychology, masters in psychology and education. So there's a background in kind of rooted in that world as well. Yeah.
Which is a wonderful marriage between psychotherapy and the metaphysics. I think and that's what this podcast is pretty much all about. And you are considered by many just to be one of the greatest psychic development mentors around. And I have experience with that, Richard. In fact, here, does this look familiar? This
Oh,
is
right.
my
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't
my
really get to see them in the
academy.
flesh, but yep,
My
brilliant. Yeah.
academy, the Richard Knight Tarot Academy, which I took after an online course with you. But let's dive in to you. And you've been doing this for 40 years. So
Plus, yeah.
I, and we're talking about fear on this podcast and how do we unravel it? How do we feel better and more joyful? And because we're always carrying fear around with us in some way. And tarot has helped me tremendously to guide me like a flashlight to navigate my fears in a much more positive way. So let's get to you and tell us how you started when you were a young boy.
Okay. Was given my first deck of tarot cards when I was about 5. I was a pretty weird kid. Didn't fit in anywhere. That probably hasn't changed much. And I'm pretty sure one of the relatives thought, "Oh, let's give the weird kid a deck of tarot cards for his birthday or for his Christmas." And I had no idea what they were. They were just kind of cardboard with pretty pictures, no concept of them. But I immediately was drawn to them. Um, and even, I didn't know what they were there for. I had no idea they were connected to, I guess you'd describe it as fortune telling back in the day. I had no idea what they were. Um, and it was only kind of maybe 2, 3 years later that everything just around tarot went, it just, for me, it just, and this is probably the case for a lot of tarot readers of my age. It was the film, James Bond film, Live and Let Die. Up until that point, tarot really wasn't known. It was very fringe, wasn't mainstream. And weirdly, that film just brought it to the attention of the public, the world. And I probably shouldn't have been watching that James Bond film. I was probably underage to watch it. But uh, it just, oh, that's what they're there for. I get it. And then it was all the mystical kind of aura that was around tarot in that film just completely opened doors for me. I mean, I had been pretty weird up in that point in terms of I was one of those kids that just knew things that they shouldn't have known instinctively. Um, and tarot kind of gave me a way of developing kind of intuition, psychic ability, because that's how tarot works, primarily, is a key to your intuition. And it just gave me kind of almost a training tool and an absolute fascination that, 50 years later hasn't dimmed at all. Coming up 59 and I'm still fascinated with tarot. I still have
Yeah.
an obsession with buying tarot decks. It just hasn't disappeared at all. Um, so yeah, it's basically been, much as you said, the tarot is an amazing tool to kind of find your way forward, to
Mhm.
kind of light the path that you're moving. And it has been for me throughout my life. So it's not something I just teach, it's something I use daily and have used it for clients for, yeah, when you say 40 years, that was kind of professionally for 40 years. And I guess it's now 40 plus years because it's still happening. Um, but yeah, if you know what you're doing with it, and that's the kind of the big question mark that's around tarot. But if you know what you're doing with it, it is an amazing tool for kind of transformation, coaching yourself, coaching others, insight, as well as kind of the ability to kind of look into the future that kind of is part of tarot as well. So
So I'll just share with you and the listeners that it was during COVID. Nobody was doing anything. I was off of Facebook, so I don't even know how this email came to me, but there was an ad for a tarot course. I think it was 6 weeks long and ended up being 7 weeks. And it was next to nothing. It cost next to nothing. And I thought, I don't know. I don't know about this tarot because I always kind of rolled my eyes at tarot, Richard. And
yeah,
and I remember it was Jane Seymour in James Bond with the
that's right.
death card. They always pull the death card, which has
Yep.
turned out to be one of my most favorite cards. But I thought, oh, I'll just take this, whatever. And Richard, they were each 2 hour sessions. I could not wait for the next week. I couldn't. And what happened to me with tarot was it opened my intuitive abilities on an exponential way that I've always been intuitive. I've always had mediumship abilities without knowing it,
Yep.
which made me a very anxious person and picking up on others
Mm.
and people that have passed. But oh my gosh, Tara, I took to it like a fish to water. And I
Yeah.
use it now, Richard. I use it just if I'm wondering, should I do this? Is this a good idea? I don't usually don't ask yes, no questions, but I'll do what would be the feeling for me if I do this? And I get an answer immediately. So when you started doing tarot, was there fear of going public with it? Because I think you were a young person and you went into
Yeah.
pubs or something.
Yeah, and I always say to kind of students, I don't recommend this as a way of learning tarot, but there was no other opportunities back in the 80s. Is yeah, I both in Scotland and in Yorkshire, in the UK, yeah, I used to go into kind of some really rough pubs and clubs with a deck of tarot cards and just put them on the table and wait, and people would eventually kind of drift over. And I would do kind of 15-minute readings for them. And it's those situations you've got to get fairly good fairly quickly. Otherwise, you basically get bounced back out the door of the pub again. So what I learned there is something that I think's missing from a lot of tarot. Understandably, a lot of people get fascinated by the cards. The cards themselves got this kind of mysterious background story. The images are fascinating, but tarot is as much about people as it is about the cards. If you're actually going to read for other people, it's arguably more about them than the tarot is the tools of the trade. And I learned very quickly kind of how to actually deliver readings and connect to people. And yeah, kind of loved it. I still occasionally just walk into places like pubs and put the cards down just because it's a great way of kind of it's like going back into a gym and lifting weights. It's that sort of thing. It just gets me. It just gets the wheels going again. And it's challenging, which is
I've
fun.
done that. I've actually done that. I've gone out with a girlfriend and I'll bring my tarot deck and we'll just start doing a reading for her. And then the waitress or waiter will come over. Oh, can you do a reading for me? Can you do it? Just because it's fun. And I just do it on the side just for fun. And it sure is a flashlight into a person, their past, present, and future. And can you help demystify it a little bit? Because it's always been sort of a woo-woo thing. I thought of it that way. It was fortune telling. It is not fortune telling. Can
No.
you can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
And how would it help us navigate our fears?
Okay. I mean, I think to kind of demystify it, you've got to go back to kind of where the cards come from originally. Or actually, that's probably more accurate to kind of how the cards looked originally. Um, it's a deck of playing cards. It's a gambling game from Italy, and it was like that for several centuries. And then I don't think anybody really knows where the transition between playing games and well, fortune telling or divination back in those days came in. But I suspect because of the images in the cards, people started using the cards to tell stories because that's what humans do. And then those stories began to come true and began to be insightful in people's lives, and it made that leap. Um, But that's only been kind of in the last couple of hundred years. Out of a 500-year history of tarot. And the reason that tarot works, or one of the main reasons that tarot works, is by complete coincidence. The imagery, particularly on the major arcana, which are the 22 major cards that everybody knows, death and the devil and etc.,
Mhm.
contain triggers. The imagery contains triggers for people's intuition. Um, and it is by coincidence because they were never created to do that. They were gambling cards. Um, and that intuition, if you're using it for yourself, your intuition's constantly trying to guide you, get you on the right path. Most of us ignore it. Particularly, I mean, I've been teaching this a long time now, and I think more and more people, generally speaking, lose a connection to their intuition because we're basically being trained to look outside of ourselves for answers. We want to be told what to think. Hence, we Google everything, etc. Very one of the basic things I say to people, when they're beginning this journey is, okay, find 10 minutes a day where you sit down quietly and you just check in with yourself. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Just go inside, block everything else off, throw the phones and the tablets and everything else that's going to bing and bleep at you out the room and just spend 10 minutes alone. I have a challenge. And funny you should talk about the Tarot Masterclass. I'm about to teach a new set this tonight with 300 people, so people will be brand new to it. And one of the challenges I always give is go and find a chair. Go and find a chair. I said, make sure you're not going to get disturbed and sit there for 20 minutes. And I go, with your eyes shut. Don't have to meditate, just sit there for 20 minutes. I guarantee you can't do it. And everybody goes, yeah, of course I can. I could sit there 20 minutes, it'd be lovely and relaxing. Most people can't make it past 10 until that chattering brain starts giving you a list of things you should be doing. You didn't answer that email, etc. Um, but fundamentally, finding that space, um, going within, to use that phrase, is is kind of the baseline, the foundations to tarot or any of this work. And tarot basically gives your intuition things to key on to the messages, etc. So one of the phrases I always use, one of the quotes, my quote that I always use is, the magic is you. The tarot is purely the keys to unlock that magic. Um, Whereas people kind of view the tarot as being the thing. That's the magic, and to a certain extent, that's true. But it pales in comparison to what is within us, that ability to tap into our intuition, to be able to use our intuitive feelings to guide others as well. Another thing I always say, that I will be saying in the first class tonight, is the way I view tarot is, when you learn what you do, you can take these amazing cards, step into someone's life at the time that they may be in the darkest, most complicated place in their life. And the tarot is like having a lantern or a shining light, and step in and go, come on, we'll use these and we'll find your way out. Um, and because tarot is a tool for guidance. The other thing I always make very clear to kind of the people that train with me is we're not in a position to give advice. We don't give advice. We can guide. We can kind of go, okay, the cards are talking about this. There's the options, but you have to make the decision as a client. And that's a line I think that gets kind of people trade over that line a lot in this field when they don't have the experience and the knowledge to do it. It's the areas you don't go into are just as important as the areas you can go into. But um, but yeah, tarot is an amazing tool. Probably the easiest tool to use to tap into your own intuitive abilities. And everybody has psychic abilities. Everybody has intuitive abilities. Um, Tarot seems to be the most direct way of getting that, and getting to that place.
Richard, I completely agree with you because after taking your online course, which I recommend to everybody, it's just fun. If nothing else, you're going to have a blast. Plus, there's a great community. So, one of my closest friends on the planet, I met through your class.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So, and we continue and read for each other and talk about life. And shout out to Lisa Montgomery. Anyway, but I remember that when you told us to or suggested that we take that 20 minutes and sit, I guarantee you, Richard, if you said 2 minutes, it would be the same thing. People can't do it. It is, you get really fidgety. It's so important. I go out into nature and that's where I get my juice filled again, my cup
Yep.
filled. So, and the other thing about tarot, there are people that do terrible readings, people that are not qualified. That's why I recommend you because you come from integrity And that is a word that is so important in this spiritual community because there's not, in a lot of places, there isn't. It's kind of a warning that I put out there. Really listen to your own gut about the person that you're working with because you know inside, but we make up excuses. So you have a responsibility that whatever you tell somebody is going to shape their life and could destroy their life.
Yep.
Can you talk about that? Because it's so important.
It amazed me. My journey through tarot is I really wasn't part of a community, a new age community or tarot community until about 7 years ago because I was too busy reading for clients. So my career of kind of 80 read for over 80,000 people. It really wasn't necessary for me to kind of to look around at what the field was doing. I was just doing my own thing. So it was a real eye opener about 7 or 8 years ago where I kind of stepped into this field. We were beginning to think about the online courses, etc., etc. Um, to try and find any mention in any of the tarot books, and there's a lot of books being written about tarot of the ethics of it. How do you actually deliver a reading? I mean, I believe that about 90% of the people who own tarot decks can't actually read them. They like reading books and they like the idea that they might be able to do it. But if you're sat there with tarot cards, you are connecting to somebody's life. You have a responsibility, but you can do a lot of damage. And there's a lot of horror stories, stupid things that tarot readers have said that might have felt dramatic in the moment. And it's often the case of they've run out of things to say, so they'll just be dramatic. And you're right, there's a lot of bad tarot readers out there without any realization, or maybe they just don't care, the impact that's going to have on that person for years to come. The example I often use, and it's one of hundreds I could mention over 40 years of doing this, is there was a lady came to me and she'd had a tarot reading. So she would have probably been in her early 30s, but she had a reading when she was 17, 18 years old. And she'd been told by a tarot reader, you will be pregnant 3 times, but only have 2 children. So she came to me expecting the third child, and she was panic stricken because she was absolutely sure she was going to lose it. And I had to sit down with her and kind of try and dissect that last reading and kind of go, I can go, no, there's a third child there, I can see a birth, etc. So we're all fine there. But she said, why did they say that? And that's a really difficult, why did they say that back when I was 17 years old? And it's a difficult thing to say. And without swearing, which I won't do on your podcast, I have
You
very
can.
strong opinions. I have very strong opinions about tarot readers and psychics who work in that way. Again, even in the first session I'm going to be delivering tonight, there is a major section that on ethics and I know for
Mhm.
people, I just want to learn how to read tarot. But yeah, I'm telling you, as soon as you start reading for another human being, there's an ethical responsibility you have the moment you do it. And I don't care if it's the first reading you've ever done in your life. There's no such thing as a fun reading. It's something else to say. You might think you're joking around and playing around, but I guarantee you parts of what you're saying are going to go in here. They might laugh and joke at the time, but it's going to stay in here because that's the power of the mystique of tarot. People take it seriously. And like, from the very first reading you do, there's a potential there to affect somebody's life, both very positively and but potentially negatively if you do it the wrong way.
Do you know the thing that I found about tarot, Richard, is that it's always there to help us. It's never there to make life difficult. It's not going to try to tell you, oh, your life's going to fall apart
Mm.
in a negative way. Everything that it tells us, it's like our higher self, is for our highest good. So every reading to me is a positive reading because
Mm.
it's getting us to our greatest purpose on the planet.
Yep.
And that's what's so important that I don't see a card in the deck that I would say, oh my God, it's a terrible card. I used to think the tower was, oh
Mm.
no, please, no, not the tower. But now I've seen the beauty in the tower and getting the tower. Can you just talk more about how tarot can be used in coaching and
Yeah.
therapy? And because I am seeing more and more people, or even in business, I'm
Mhm.
seeing very successful business coaches working with CEOs and, celebrities, whatever you want to say,
Yeah.
using tarot to
Yeah.
help navigate their client.
One of the main ways that tarot works is it will highlight. potentially different routes that you may never have considered. Even in the most basic, the most basic card spread is the Celtic cross, or one of the most basic that people tend to learn. Used properly, it highlights different ways forward. So if you're reading for, and to be honest, I've read for kind of very well-known CEOs, and in business and celebs, etc., and VIPs. They're just people. They have the same decisions to make, maybe at different levels, but they're just the same people. So I don't have a different approach to tarot, really, if somebody's a CEO of a company.
Mhm.
Less so, yeah. In days gone by, you had to rename the tarot so it sounded less woo woo and less mystical, to get in, or to get people said don't mention tarot, just mention kind of flashcards. Okay, I'll talk about flashcards then. Now that's not a problem because I think they've lost quite a lot of the woo woo element. People are understanding them as a psychological tool as well. But one of the beauties with tarot is it will give you alternative viewpoints. It will give you, if you thought you were going to go in that direction and you're struggling with it, it might go, actually, if you look that way, that probably be easier. So one of the beauties of tarot is that it will do that, and actually that it works on that level purely from a psychological. That's the most amazing coaching tool I think that's ever been created. One of the ways I describe that tarot is you're carrying 78 of the world's best life coaches in your pocket. Um, because in a sense, it's doing what a coach does. A coach is kind of trying to help you find your way forward, the new path, the authentic path, and they do that usually by kind of bringing in concepts and ideas and questions. Tarot, it's built into the tarot. That's why it's an amazing coaching tool, and probably a good 50% of my students, if not more, now who are working professionally are moving into that area. A lot, and what's interesting is a lot more people are joining the courses and the academies and various other things they do, whose background is primarily therapy. Because of the way I approach tarot, and I do demystify it. I don't talk about it in fortune telling, etc. terms. It doesn't have that stigma, and they
Mhm.
understand how the tool can help kind of peel through layers with clients. Um, uh, and there's not many tools. I used to describe the tarot to skeptics, as look, it's just a much better, more complex, more insightful version of the Rorschach test, the ink blot test. I said, yeah, and when I was talking to skeptics, they used to go, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, which it is on one level. There's a way of reading cards that I teach, which is based on almost on that Rorschach approach. Um,
Okay, that's fascinating. That makes so much sense to me. I also remember in your classes, there were physicians, there were attorneys, there were professionals that you wouldn't normally think would be tarot. Talk about tarot is getting demystified, which I'm super grateful for. And I talk about on this podcast because it's kind of the meeting of neuroscience and metaphysics, that so many people that are researchers or psychologists or psychiatrists or neurosurgeons or neuroscientists are now talking about visualization, intuition, manifestation. This is real stuff. This isn't woo woo. Now, and back in the day, if they had written about that, they would have been frowned upon. But now it's different. Can you address how tarot has shifted from being woo woo in and being a bit demystified as legit?
it's still moving in that direction. I think I was probably one of the main voices of last year's going, actually, let's move it away. And I got a lot of pushback. I still do get a lot of pushback from people who don't like me demystifying it. And to clear, I think the tarot is a magical thing. The tarot is incredible and how it works. But there is still a section of the tarot community who want to keep it in the fortune teller image. So um, but I think the idea of images having an effect on our thinking and our behavior, which is in essence what this tarot does. I mean, one of the greatest way of using a tarot card is when somebody's got a question in their mind, is just to put a card out in front of them and just go, look, the answer's on that image. Look at it for yourself. You'll find it in there. I've done this. I created an image, which has got nothing to do with tarot. It has some of the same psychological or intuitive triggers built into it. And I often put up on the screen and go, the answer to your questions on that picture, just look at it, you'll find it. And 90% of people go, yeah, it's there, isn't it? I know what I'm going to want to do that. It's because the imagery fires off, I said, our own intuitive processes. You mentioned higher self. Again, it links to higher self as well. That guidance is coming through, um, uh, which is important because it begins to move us away from the classical method of tarot, which is you've got to learn these 78 meanings.
Mhm.
And then hell, the cards could be reversed. They could be that way up instead of that way. So you have to remember 78 other meanings. Human memory can't do that. And what's really interesting is because I'm a tarot from a professional point of view, this has been my career. And it's very different when you read it professionally. What works in books doesn't work in real life.
Yeah.
You probably won't find any professional readers who use anything that's in a book. It just is. It's yeah. And what makes me laugh, and I upset some authors there, and there's some amazing authors of tarot out there that I've got a lot of respect for. But most tarot books are just copied from other tarot books. You can find the same meanings and the same lines copied again and again and again, going, okay. And it's pretty obvious that some of the authors have never done a reading in their life. It's more of an academic exercise, which is fine. That's great. But it doesn't really help people who actually want to do it. But but in terms of kind of that demystifying, I think demystifying it makes it easier for people to grasp and understand. You don't have to be the seventh son of the seventh son or whatever. It is something that anybody can learn. And tarot works on different levels. Again, I would say, look, there's a psychological level where tarot works, which is why sometimes people can take a brand new deck of tarot cards out of the box for Christmas. They've never read it before, follow the little book, and actually do quite an accurate reading because it's built into the tarot. Um, there's psychological reasons why the tarot will work. But then, you move through intuitive, it's a trigger for intuition. If you use tarot long enough, you actually start leaving the traditional meanings of the cards, and whatever that meaning for that card that pops into your head at that point is the one you're going to go with, which is usually way more accurate as well.
So I appreciate that because in your class, you'd say, okay, learn the basics here, and then your own intuition is going to come in. And I do now, what I do is I just lay the cards down and instantly, Richard, I get the answer. Instantly, I get a message. And I don't stare at it for too long and I don't try to come up with this big story. It's like boom, boom, boom. When I was doing this podcast, I did a Celtic cross before when I had the idea for it. And the guidance in it was just remarkable. It also showed me where there were going to be real challenges, but how there was going to be light at the end of the tunnel. And the one that I'll never forget was I decided one morning to pull a couple cards. And this was when I was just starting to launch. And I pulled a couple cards. I went, oh no, my producer's leaving me. I just knew that. I knew that from because he got a big project. And I just knew that. So that day I get an email. I go, Sandi, I'm sorry, but
Mhm.
I'm going to have to move on. And he suggested some other. So I went through this. The thing that the tarot told me was it's okay because it's going to be even better.
Yeah.
And I interviewed like 20 different companies, and it ended up that, oh my gosh, Richard, the situation that I ended up in was so much a better fit.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting because in a situation like that, if somebody had said when the producer was leaving, what card tells you that? Your chances are, I don't know. I just know. And
Exactly,
And that
exactly.
becomes an issue. The more experience you get with tarot, and somebody says, "Well, which card tells you that?" I don't know. It just hit it. And one of the ways that I teach tarot now is when you put the cards out, is before you even start thinking about what the meanings of the cards should be, ask yourself, right, what do I feel and what do I suddenly know? Because before your conscious mind has processed the individual cards, your subconscious, your intuitive mind's already got there. So that sense of clairsentience, claircognizance,
Mhm.
what do I feel? What do I know? Boom. And sometimes in that second, you've got the whole message from the cards before you have to go into the individual cards there. It's just how the intuition works.
So one of my favorite things about it is it is an absolute exponential rocket ship to your intuition. And that's what I found. And it also, what it did for me was my mediumship ability skyrocketed.
Yes.
It just opens up all these portals, these channels that we've just kind of shut down. And I heard somebody say, we hear a lot, the veil is thinning, the veil is thinning. But what this one person said, it's not that the veil is thinning, the veil over our eyes is thinning. It's like you had really thick cataracts and now they're
Mm,
coming off. And
mm.
that's what it does. Now, tell me about your mediumship abilities because you have that as well.
Yeah,
And yeah, go with
probably
that.
at least 50% of the sessions I did. I always say mediumship is something I have a love-hate relationship with, if I'm really honest. Is um, tarot is easier to do. I don't mean to technically, it just has less of an emotional
Mhm.
effect. Um, uh, but fortunately and unfortunately, my mediumship seemed to attract quite a large audience, and so it was always part of it. It
Yeah.
wasn't until I had a kind of breakthrough in my late 20s, because through my 20s, I'd done a lot of TV stuff. I had some amazing clients, household name musicians, all the people I idolized, at that point in time. And I guess nowadays we call it burnout. I just had enough. When I got to about 28, 29, it actually all felt so kind of false. It's like I was becoming a psychic performing seal.
Mhm.
It's like, Richard, can you go to that studio and do that bit and da. I walked away from everything. I literally kind of pretty much sold everything I had, as much as you can at the age of 28. And I moved into a cottage on the west coast of Scotland, and became a hermit for a year. And the intention was, what is this all to do? A, do I still want to keep doing it? B, what is it all about then? What's the point of doing this? And the mediumship, the tarot, through that almost 12 months, I realized it's all about healing. It's all about healing. It's helping other people to heal. So that's what mediumship's about. That's what tarot is about. It's however you want to define healing, whether it's grief, whether it's just trauma, confusion, whatever. It's about people. It's about helping people heal on different levels, and that's been the central essence of my work ever since, is the effect it has on people. So mediumship obviously has the problem with mediumship after 40 years um, is you kind of it was about 80,000 client sessions I've done plus. Um, there's a point where, and this is not just with mediums, it's to do with anybody who deals with people in a grieving process. There's a danger you become quite thick-skinned. And I never wanted to get to that point where it just felt like a job. So I did step back from it. I've stepped back from it a few times because it was just taking too much of a toll on me. And I always say this to kind of people who are come to me and said, "How do I develop as a medium?" My first question to them is, "Why do you want to do it?"
Mhm.
It's not what you see on television. It's not what you think it is. It's going to have an effect. Yes, you're doing an amazing job. You can transform people's lives. You can give them comfort, reassurance, and answer questions for them, which is amazing. But understand what it's going to do for you as well. And was, I probably didn't do all the right protection exercises and balance. I tend to go at things about
Yeah.
1,000 miles an hour. I'm famous for just like, let's
Yeah.
do it. I don't have anything but go straight on the accelerator. Um, and that probably is a mistake if you're working in this field. You've got to balance your self-care with it. So mediumship, um, when I was doing the sessions, I loved it, but it began to kind of have a toll afterwards. And I thought, I've got to balance this out. I've got to step back. And I began to concentrate more on the tarot. Um,
Can you give any examples of one of the readings that you did with mediumship that was profound to you?
yeah, there's been a lot. I've done readings for people who have, I suppose the ones that stand out are the ones that are that's so unusual. And that unfortunately tends to be people who have lost relatives through unusual or fairly
Mm.
horrific circumstances. So I have unfortunately read for the families of victims of serial killers,
Mm.
etc. And people, and they stand out. Um, A, because you're able to give them some answers. There's always question marks after, what happened. It's, how did they suffer? Did they suffer, etc. But there's also the if you have to boil mediumship down, to kind of one simple message. And all readings come down to this one simple message is they love you and they're okay. That's what all mediumship comes down to. Um, there may be other specific questions they have, but in essence, and just for loved ones coming through to be able to share that message with their family is in itself. You can see the kind of healing process. One that stands out was the basis of a meditation that I share on pretty much all the classes I do, which is a meditation I call Reunion, which is was created for myself. I created it for myself when I was doing a lot of TV stuff and a lot of platform stuff that I had to get into the zone really quickly. So I created this meditation that would basically um, get me to where I needed to get to. I only ever used it for myself, but I was doing reading, and it must be 25 years ago now. But this young lady came in, and her mum had just passed about 2 weeks before. And her mum came through and was very chatty. But you can tell as a medium that, yeah, everything made sense, everything connected, but it wasn't enough. She needed that more of a connection to her mum. And I just said to her, look, I've never shared this with anybody else. Close your eyes. I'll take you through this meditation.
Yeah.
Took her to reunion. And part of reunion is walking them into what I call the white room, which is a sacred space that you create in your head. And her mum was there from spirit. And she just walked into her mum was there. And I just went, I'll leave the two of you to chat.
Mm.
And because she was there face to face with her mum, there was not a medium in between having to pass the message on. She was getting it there. And I was watching her face. And you could just see the grief and the stress and the worry just lifting off her. She had that first-hand experience of it, and no medium can really do that. It's always, mediumship is coming through you. You're the medium, but and that shifted things for me as well. I started when I was doing live events, always including that meditation in, even if it was a group of 200 people, to give them that experience of connecting directly. Um, uh, that was a major shift for me on how I approached it. But it is about healing. It's, at different levels, different degrees, not every reading is going to have the same effect.
Mhm.
Um, but you really hope that you can, yeah, somebody can walk away just feeling they're around me and they love me.
So that beautiful meditation reunion is in the academy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, master classes.
and we get we got to do that, and it's a beautiful one, and I go back to that one. It really is. It just gets you into that space
Mhm, mhm.
that, oh my, and that is called reunion, is so beautiful.
I used to use it in live events, and in some places where, like, very obvious, like husbands and boyfriends have been dragged along by their wives and girlfriends, and they'd be sat there in the audience going like that. And you've done this long enough, you can spot them while they've gone, I'm sure you'd much rather be watching football at home. But it's really interesting when they go with when reunion has been the third part of the evening event I used to do, and they go with it. Suddenly, these very bored, tough-looking blokes, just you can look at their faces and you go, "Ah, you've just connected with somebody there." And I've had so many blokes come up and hug me at the end, going, "I thought this was all rubbish until that moment. My mum was there,"
Oh,
and
oh.
yeah, that changes things for you. That changes things for you.
It's beyond beautiful. And also when in mediumship, when you, I love evidentiary mediumship, where you actually have evidence of
Mm.
that person on the other side. Like, oh, they're wearing the sweater, the blue sweater that you love so much. I mean, that you can't deny that kind of thing. I've had a couple of those experiences where names and things would come out and I'd go, I don't know what this means. And it certainly struck a chord with people.
It
It's
is. I
just a,
think I was always trained that mediumship you have to provide evidence. I think it's been only maybe in
yeah.
the last 5 years that it's got less like that, and there's a balance between providing evidence and also being able to convey the message that spirit's coming through there. Um, but yeah, being able to give that sort of level of information. I tend to use automatic writing a lot, even on stage, because that allows me to get really quite detailed information to people in the audience, including if grandma wants to give her phone number from 35 years ago, the phone number gets written down. Um, uh, but
And that's something that happened.
yeah, I think there's a video for it around somewhere on the internet. But it happens quite a lot. It happens quite a lot. Really very specific kind of pin numbers, phone numbers. Old people will write license plate on their grandpa's car from But I can only do that because I use automatic writing. It won't it's too confusing when it stays up here, but the fact that it's being written down, I can actually decipher it a lot easier. So I use that tool a lot as well.
Richard, will you explain to our listeners what automatic writing is?
Yeah, I mean, there's different phases of it. Uh, Automatic writing can just be a tool for your subconscious. It's often used like that to unlock kind of feelings and thoughts that you may not be able to express any other way. It's used in therapy quite a lot. Automatic writing can also be just a tool for your intuition. So I will use it in tarot as well. I'm not connecting to spirit primarily at that point in time, but my intuition is giving me information. And yeah, what happens, again, there's different types of automatic writing, but I guess the classic form is where your hand just starts writing and you're not controlling it, which is a very weird thing when it happens. At least the first time, it's very weird. But it's not particularly a difficult skill to develop, actually. One of the phrases I always use is you just have to get out of the way of yourself, which basically means you just have to tell your left critical brain to shut up, because that's the bit that kind of usually trips people up. And then there's automatic writing, which I think is probably the more traditional view of it, or the more established view of it, which is spirit communicating through automatic writing. I use automatic writing in every phase of what I do. It's not just to do with spirit; it's to do with tarot. One of the things I always teach in the class is always have a pad of paper and a pen because things will come through. You might not be able to explain it at that moment. You might not even know what it means, but write it down, and then back to the person you're reading for afterwards. But automatic writing, yeah, because I teach psychic development, I have done for a long time. There's certain tools I always say, if I had to focus people on anything, meditation, one of them, journaling, another. Pendulums are an amazing tool to learn and use. Automatic writing is probably in the same family as automatic writing in the same family as pendulums as well. But there's certain tools that are so, and then tarot, they're so reliable. And I've been teaching this now for over 30 years, and almost everybody can grasp those. Uh,
Pendulum has been harder for me. For some reason, it's getting better. But somebody did a reading the other day, a friend of mine, and that pendulum was swinging all over I mean, it was crazy. Like it had a life of its own.
mm.
What, telling me a little bit more about pendulums because I
Pendulum.
really want to get better at it.
There's definitely a kind of pathway to kind of learning pendulums. Everybody jumps several steps too far, too fast. You have to kind of calibrate it. First of all, you have to know how to hold a pendulum. That's
Yeah.
something that's almost never covered in books. And basically, it's like if that's the tabletop, having your elbow on the tabletop, having your wrist straight and holding it. Basically, because you want to be able to hold the pendulum still so
Hmm.
it's not shaking, because otherwise you're going to misread it. If it's just naturally shaking because your hand's shaking, then you're going to misread it. So, and then it's calibrating it, which is asking it questions you already know the answers to. I mean, bearing in mind, pendulums they're binary. It's yes, no, black, white. Um, you can't ask it what type of car am I going to get next because it can't answer that unless it's going to spell it out letter by letter. So it has to be binary. So I always say to people, then test it with questions you know the answer to and let it swing. So you know where the yes is, what direction the yes is, and which direction the no is, because that will differ from person to person. The other thing is over time, that will differ for the same person. So yes might be
Yeah.
back and forth. In 6 months' time, for no apparent reason, it's decided it's going to go the other way. And I can't explain that. It just does it. I know it, I've seen it happen so often. And that trips people up. And then the next stage after asking questions that you know the answer to is asking questions that you don't know the answer to, but you can get immediate feedback. So you
Mhm.
ask a friend something or a friend of a friend something you don't know. So you get feedback. Then you can jump to the questions that you don't know the answer to, and you're basically getting the guidance from a pendulum. But everybody jumps there first, um,
Right.
and misses out the training part of it. Pendulum's great once you get the hang of it. And the reason why it doesn't work all the time for some people is they've not gone through the kind of calibration stage, or they're asking it a question that they have a real emotional investment in the answer.
Hmm.
It's like tarot. Reading tarot for yourself when you're asking a question you've got a real emotional investment in is really difficult because unconsciously you're going to start slanting the cards to make it fit what you really want to hear. And pendulum even more so. Um, It's much easier to use the pendulum with somebody else where you don't have an investment in the answer than for yourself. And that is true for most tools.
So one thing I didn't realize, because the pendulum will work for me sometimes, a really great way to do it, in you taught in the class in the academy, I think it was, to get a deck of cards,
Mm.
put them down, face down, and then put the pendulum over it, and you go red, black, you're deciding. So that that would work for me on occasion, but I didn't realize that the pendulum will recalibrate itself at some
Yeah,
point, because
yeah,
then all of a sudden the yes became the no, and the no became the yes, and I got interesting.
yeah. It does it. I don't know why it does it. I mean, if
So
it's not the pendulum, it's your intuition. I mean, the pendulum is purely a tool that your intuition, your psychic ability uses. The pendulum itself, unless it's made of specific crystals, and the crystals have got energy in them. The pendulum itself is not a magical tool. It's a weight on the end of a bit of string or a bit of thread, but it's a tool where your intuition can give you answers very obviously. So the confusion is usually to do with intuition,
so
not
you
with a
have
tool.
to calibrate it every time that you
I
use it.
always advise people to do it. Yeah, I mean, just asking a
Yeah,
simple yes or no question, and you go, okay, we've not changed
right.
now.
No, that makes
Um,
a whole lot of sense. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an amazing tool. I mean, the dowsing and pendulums have been, you know, I've got a good friend, kind of Yuri Geller, who's his
Hmm.
fortune is made from dowsing.
Yeah.
He's flown over oil fields and mineral fields on a plane, and he was just dowsing over a map and going, yeah, drill there. So it can be used. The sky's the limit, basically. But again, it's your own ability, your own intuition, your own psychic ability that's actually moving the pendulum. Um, the pendulum is just an
It's all
indicator.
fascinating. It's all magical. It's, a lot of it we can't even explain why this is working, but it absolutely works. I once knew some dowsers, and they took me out, and it that just completely works. But to explain why that's working, I couldn't tell you for the life of me. So in tarot, I'm curious, if you could tell us a story or two that really, really helped somebody, or just stood out in your mind, that was just like mind blowing. It's always fun to hear those kinds of stories.
I'll give you two. I'll give you kind of the probably what you understand as a more traditional view of a reading, and then I'll give you
Okay.
another example, which is where tarot's going. At least part of my work in tarot's going. Um, Uh, One of them was sounds very simple, very straightforward, but it's exactly what this person needed. I was reading for this lady, and her husband had just passed, and her entire security was basically in a folder which had all the financial documents, all the insurance documents, all the wills, and she couldn't find it. They ransacked the house. Her husband had been bedridden, so they knew it had to be in the house. It wasn't anywhere else. Um, and we went in. I can remember a very nice kitchen she had on the kitchen table. This is quite a while ago. Put the cards out, and looked at the cards, and this is partly what do I feel from the cards.
Mhm.
And I said it's upstairs in the drawer to the right of the dressing table. Um, she goes upstairs, comes down with a blue folder, a lot of expletives. Our son was there going, "Where the hell? We checked that." So that was direct to the point. It sounds simple, but it absolutely changed her life because she was gonna lose the house, she was gonna lose everything, and literally in 10 minutes, everything had pivoted for her. There's been other points where, you know, typically you read for somebody who is going. A lot of the reason why people come to tarot readers is because they're going through a difficult time in life and they don't know where else to get answers. A lot of time when people come to tarot readers, it's because of relationship or emotional problems.
Mhm.
Who can you ask whether your relationship's worth continuing or not with? Um, um, and I remember reading for a lady who's just absolutely devastated to the point of she didn't think she wanted to go on. It was that bad. And put the cards out, and she didn't believe a word of this at the time. And I just said, "There's another relationship coming," and she said, "That'd be the last thing I ever want. Never
Mm.
again." I'm devastated. I said, "It's coming." Described a little bit about this person coming in and said, "Your life, if you come to see me in 12 months' time, your life is going to be transformed. You won't be living in this country anymore. You'll be engaged, etc." And I think she went out thinking he's either rubbish or he's off his head. She phones me and about 3 months later goes, "I've just met him. You just described him." And then she came back to see me, flew back in to see me a year later and said, "I'm engaged and we're living in Spain now." So it was just yeah, that moment where she just thought, this cannot happen to me. But the joy
Oh,
in her voice when she phones me 3 months later going, yeah, I've met him. I know this is my new beginning, new start. The other story I'll just share, which is where tarot is going, for at least for me, but it's becoming more used with therapists as well, is once you understand that tarot works, partly because imagery is triggering things,
mm,
you can use that in a lot of different ways. I have a card that I've not actually shared publicly yet. People know of it, but I designed a card from kind of bottom up to do this, which will remove pain. I just get somebody to look at the card and tell them the story behind the card, and by the time they've finished the story in about 4 or 5 minutes, the pain might have dropped from 10 down to one, or a phobia might just have gone. Um, I again, we've demonstrated this. I think there's videos floating around as well of this quite a well-known video of a lady who had, and I cannot remember. It's a form of MS, but it's when I asked her to scale the pain from 1 to 10, she went, "It's on 100. It's that bad."
oh,
And we just put the card out and just chatted to her and told her the story behind the image on the card. And four months later, said, "Where's your pain now?" She said, "One." I said, "I better leave it at one because if I take it to nothing, then you won't know you've got it, and that's not a good thing." And then somebody else with kind of, I think it was in the same session that was videoed when I was in Florence, who had a phobia of heights. You couldn't even say the word heights to her, and she'd have a panic
oh,
attack. And put the card out and told her a slightly different story based on that. And at the end of about 5 minutes, you can remember if she had been scared of heights and why she'd ever be scared of heights. And then she went and climbed up to the top of the cathedral in Florence without any problems at all. And
yeah.
that's to do with the power of imagery
Mm.
and the story behind the imagery. So that to me has been for the last 2 years is one of the directions that I'm taking tarot now. Um, something I
That,
always did.
go ahead. No, you go
Yeah,
ahead.
something I always did because I have a background in hypnosis, hypnotherapy, NLP,
Hmm.
etc. Um, and a bit like the story I was telling you about the lady who I took that through that reunion meditation. I used to get clients for tarot readings. We were talking about relationships, and they would say, "I'm not going to meet anybody. You know, I'm agoraphobic, or I can't go outside, or whatever the fear was." And it occurred to me that actually I've got the skill set to remove that phobia. So at the end of the session, I said, "Okay, finish the reading. Do you want to get rid of the phobia?" And that developed from that point there. So I became known as a tarot reader that you didn't get a reading for, but whatever blocks you had when you walked in, you'd gone by the time you left. Um,
Wow.
uh, and that really intrigued me and interested me on that. So that's something that's going to be beginning to come out towards the summer. We're running some workshops on it, on how
Oh
to
my
use.
God. So is that something that a person could do alone with
Yeah,
themselves if there was a
yeah, yeah,
recording of you? So you
yeah.
know what's working there is the mind doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. So it's going to take any story that you give it. And if the story is strong enough and resonates enough and gets into the neural pathways,
Mhm.
it's going to change.
And the image is strong enough, and then it's a tarot card, and that has a mystique of it because the tarot, there's a lot of things that just. I have a theory, probably too long to describe, but I have a theory why most things like hypnosis works,
Mhm.
and I've yet to be disproved. I've talked to a lot of NLP experts and hypnotists, and they've not yet disproved my theory of why it works. But that was the basis of creating that process. We called it the 23rd card originally. Just there was another tarot card, but some people thought I'd suddenly found a missing tarot card somewhere in the basement of El Domo in Florence. I went, no, that's not what I mean. So we've got a different name for it now, but yeah, it's just a very powerful image that you can weave stories around. Ericksonian hypnosis, where it's a form of storytelling. You weave stories around it, and by the time you finish the story, they kind of go, "Hang on, that doesn't hurt anymore."
Oh my
Um,
God, that sounds unbelievable. And absolutely sounds to me like something like that could work. Why does tarot work? When I read tarot, it works. It's telling me a little glimpse into my consciousness or my unconsciousness and bringing it conscious. It's Oh, that's incredible,
Well, if you
Richard.
like it, if you think about it, it's a more sophisticated version of what we're talking about pendulums. The pendulum moves
Yeah.
because your intuition is giving you the answer. Tarot is a more sophisticated version of it because what your intuition is doing is finding the triggers in the cards to start to start giving you that story of the guidance, whether it's for yourself or for other people. So it's yeah, it's all going to the same place. It's I said before, it's you're the magic. The rest of it is just tools to get there.
It's so true. We are so magical and we just don't, we just put like a bag over our heads or our
It's getting worse.
bodies. And
Yeah, it is getting worse because I've said, back in the bad days when we had lockdowns and COVID, there was a feeling of we're going to come out of this changed. We're going through such a traumatic experience, worldwide. We're going to come out changed and more spiritual. I think his section has, but it
Mhm.
doesn't seem to have affected populations at large. And if anything, I think we're living in a smaller and smaller world because our world revolves around kind of these things now. Yeah.
Yeah, our phones. And
Yeah.
I do think we're starting to see control sources faster. I think some people are waking up a
Yeah.
lot faster than they would have. And that even doing this podcast, Richard, I wouldn't have done it 15
Yeah.
years ago. And I'm
Yeah.
putting myself out there and talking about things that I've never shared with people before,
Yeah.
that aren't my closest people in my world. So I think that's getting better. And people like you and talking about tarot, how it's more mainstream and it's not about,
The fear of
woo
gratification
woo
too.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. No,
exactly.
yeah.
Oh
But
my gosh, Richard, this has gone by so fast. I
hasn't
have
it?
it's just, I just love talking to you and I love what you brought into my life and I'm so appreciative of it. And
More than welcome.
but I do have a few questions I ask
Go
everybody at
ahead.
the end.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
don't
Absolutely.
mind, we'll fire away here. Okay. What would be your number one strategy to go to relieve mental distress, stress?
Um, that answer will have shifted depending on age, how old I get.
Oh,
For most of my life, it would have been just full steam ahead, just go for it. And it's kind
mhm,
of the answers I talk about. Mental distress is, again, depends on kind of where you are on that
mhm,
spectrum. But often the answer I give to people who work with me, who are scared of taking that step, let's use the word tarot, who have learned the stuff but are too scared to go out and do a reading. And I often describe myself as, professional pushing off the end of a diving board, or I
mhm.
literally just do it. Once you've done it, you're fine. And it's kind of changed a bit because I now have to have strategies in place. I don't think necessarily emotional distress, but I have ADHD badly, which you can probably tell from an hour of this.
Not at all.
uh, but I describe it as my superpower. But it can sometimes become all consuming, and there's no stop button. So the foot never comes off the accelerator. So I have to kind of find balance. I always advise people, particularly if they get into this field, which can be all consuming, it can become a passion that takes over.
Mhm,
And it's advice I was given when I was about 11 by a professional tarot reader. Make sure you've got something else in your life that is really important, like a hobby or something that you can switch off to. Weirdly, most of the top psychics that I've ever known, it tends to be painting. Most top psychics are artists, which kind of makes sense. They're spending most of the time in the right brain. And I wish I'd got that. So my advice would be, yeah, have a passion. Have a
yeah.
passion that you're not earning money from, that you can just go and do and you love. And I was
Mm.
talking about this the other night to one of my groups. When people go, but I don't have that, I go, think back to your childhood. What did you really love doing as a kid? Where because that's where we before life gets in the way. And when we're three years old, go back there because the clues are back there. Um,
Mm. Mm.
and
That's
you can
good.
when people retire, they'll often go back and take up interests that they had in childhood.
That is so true. That's
So
such a
it,
good point.
and it's find passion.
Absolutely.
And the things that inspire me, I mentioned it before. I do a lot of work with Uri Geller, and he's 78, and he's got the energy of a 30-year-old because he still loves what he does. He is passionate about what he does. And you look at all these people like the Rolling Stones, Tom Jones, they're in their 70s, sometimes in their 80s, at
Yeah.
this stage, and it's because they love what they do, the passion. And I think having something there that is separate
Mm.
from work. It's something you can do almost by yourself. You can paint or whatever it is,
Yeah.
or play music or listen to music, whatever. I think it's really, really important.
Oh, that's such a good point. And Yuri Geller looks so young. It's freaky. He's like a
He's
freak
amazing.
of nature.
He's
He's
amazing.
amazing.
He's
He's
amazing.
amazing. So my next question you might have just answered was what's one of the best pieces of advice you've received in life, personally or professionally? And that might have
Um, yeah, probably the best piece of advice is do what you love and ignore everybody else, which is
mm,
easier said than done. I was kind of lucky because this is the only path I've ever been on. And I discovered it when I was like 5 years old. So there's never been alternatives realistic for me. There's been a lot of people who say, "Why are you wasting your time doing that?" Before, um, but somebody says, "Yeah, if you love it, do it," um,
so
and just
you didn't have too much fear around it because you started so young that it's before you could really
I
fear
wasn't
it.
I wasn't I wasn't brought up in an environment that particularly supported it. So it was always the weird
Mm.
kid, don't tell anybody you're doing this, etc., etc., which I completely ignored. But um, it wasn't really advice, but I think finding a role model or a hero quite early on in life is really important to model yourself on. Uh, as well, something something to look up to, somebody who you aspire to be like. I think that's
Who was yours?
Uri Geller.
Oh, was
It was really very very strange. I had a moment a few years ago when I was working with him, um, and he's still. I mean, the same. Never meet your heroes, and the man is amazing. And there's so much about him that's not known. His work with the CIA and Mossad, etc., that's not been public knowledge. Um, uh, but I was out filming with him in Israel, and he just grabs my phone. He says, "Just let me have that for a minute." I think, "Oh God, it's going to bend or something." And he says, "Don't look at that until you get back to the hotel." So go back to the hotel and play the video, and it's on my website. I always get quite emotional because it was a 50-year climb to get to the top of this mountain, but he calls this video good. Richard Knight's the best tarot reader in the world. And I thought, okay, because messaging friends going, I'm going to retire now. That's it. I
oh,
can't. And it's like, so your childhood hero, um, 50 years on, is the one that's boosting you and telling you they're the best in the world. That was like things
uh,
come down to full circle, and it was also that. Yeah, you were right. You stuck to your guns and you did what you wanted to do, and you got to where you want to go.
oh,
Um,
full circle. And that's what I tell people that something that might happen today, you will be shocked maybe 10 years, 10, 20 years, 30 years, because I've had it with this podcast, something that happened 30 years ago. And all of a sudden I'm talking to an expert that was attached to this book that I loved. And I just thought, I never dreamed this, but always you just leave that dreaming
synchronicity.
open.
Yeah, synchronicity is
Oh,
an amazing thing.
synchronicity. Yes, and it gets better and better. The more you open your intuition, and the tarot really helps with
Mm.
that, the more synchronicity.
Oh yeah,
Wow. Isn't that wild? And just the fact that you're here, Richard, that's just in COVID, I'm taking this class
yeah,
from this person I don't know, and now you've become such an important person in my life, really. And I do think even doing the podcast, it had something to do with taking that $47 course at the time or whatever. I don't know what it is now, but man, was it
yeah.
worth
It
it.
was about
Then
$47. Yeah,
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 and then I
yeah.
did the academy and I was so in this whole thing. So also you sent me a card after we do the academy, you send a card and it's an
Hmm.
intuitive card. The card that you sent me was the strength card.
There you go. Right. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and can you explain what that is? Just
Yeah, strength
if
is
people don't know.
willpower, focus, pushing through. Um, but it's a positive card. It's basically saying
Yeah.
you're going to get there. It's going
Yeah.
to take, and sometimes is a card to do with kind of health as well. But in the situation, people don't believe me, but we have thousands on the academies now. Tens of thousands have gone through the master classes. But I genuinely go through and choose a card for every person that used to come through the academy. We don't do it now because it's so big and it comes. But
Yeah.
in the early days, we did. And it is a very intuitive thing. I have somebody's name in front of me and go, what do I need to choose for them? What feels right? And I have a whole deck of cards spread out in front of me and go, they're having that one. Um, but it's strange because, well, it's not really strange. But it's it's interesting that I hear this from so many people that that was the card they needed at that point in their life.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was just I got that card because you sent it to us, and
mm,
that was a real treat. And yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
yeah.
That card was right, what I needed right at that time. Um, what do you what do you think is a successful life?
Um, Happiness for me and the people that matter around me.
Mm.
I've had this conversation recently with somebody, and actually, you know, on my gravestone, forget the tarot. It's just he was a good husband and a good dad.
Oh,
That's it. That's the
yeah,
only thing that really means anything. Yeah, it's
yeah,
everything else. The tarot journey is for me, but uh, but it's not all about me.
yeah.
It's That's what matters.
I hear ya. I hear ya. Okay, last one. Complete this sentence. In the past, I was, and now I am.
Uh, in in the past, I was uh, trying too hard, and now
Mm.
I'm less.
And now
I
you're
talked about.
what?
I'm less so trying
Yeah.
so hard. I'm kind of beginning to. So I'm 60 next year, and I'm beginning to kind of go. Okay, we can kind of not coast. I can never coast, but it's like nothing to prove. Um,
Oh, isn't that a
most of the fuel for most of my life has been I have to prove something because you get so many people knocking you for doing what you're doing, what you're wasting time, it's all rubbish, etc., etc. So you're constantly pushing and pushing and pushing, trying to just without swearing. But it's kind of trying to prove everybody wrong that it's right. And I kind of got to the point in the last 4 or 5 years going, no, I'm kind of quite, I'm all right now. I'm not, I
Mm.
don't have that fire burning anymore. I got everything I wanted to get in terms of, you know, the tarot, etc.
Yeah. It's a very peaceful place to be. And
Mm,
and you're in the flow more. You're just so much more in the flow when you're not pushing. Because I found that when I push and push and go, I have to do this, I've got to do that, it's got to be this way. There's like a big stop sign in front of me. I just feel paralyzed. And then when I
mm.
just go in the flow, man, it's just so much better.
It's the thing that's changed for me is because I don't have to kind of push so hard. I've nothing to prove.
Mhm.
My happy place is a creative place. I mean, it's to do with tarot psychic development, um, where I can just sit and create new card spreads for people or new approaches to for people to doing tarot psychic development. I've got the space, the mental space to do that now.
Mhm.
We're teaching an event in a tarot event in Venice, 3 weeks time. So I fly out about a week before, and I can just sit on the balcony in Venice and just with leather notebooks all over the place, which I usually have around me, and I just write and write and write and write
Oh,
and write, and that's
oh,
that's my happy place for me.
oh,
And I never
sounds
had a chance for 40 years, never had a chance to do that.
that sounds wonderful. Well, good for you. Congratulations on that. Richard, where can people find you?
Probably the easiest place is go to the website because everything's linked off the website. Or you can find me on Facebook as well. But so the website address is www.richard-knight.co.uk, or just put Richard Knight Tarot in onto Google and you'll find.
Knight, like a knight in shining armor,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Knight.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you just Google Richard Knight Tarot, you'll find the website and
And
everything's.
and I encourage any listener out there that if you have like the slightest thought of wanting to learn about tarot or opening up your own intuition and catapulting yourself, take this. I am not sponsored for Richard. I am not, he didn't even know I was going to say this, but I really, really believe in that. And it has really, really changed my life and brought wonderful friendships into my life too because you're part of a Facebook group in a portal, and it's just beautiful people that are there to help each other. And it's all about healing, folks, It's really
It's
all about
one thing
healing.
if I can just say that that's one of the things about the academy that I always say is, and this has got nothing to do with me. It just seems to have attracted people that are really supportive of everybody else. There's a lot of
Mhm.
friendships that have been made. People want to practice readings. There's always people who want to practice readings. That's nothing to do with me. It's just we made the space, and the right people seem to be attracted to it, which is quite unusual in this field, I think.
And the other thing I can say when I started taking your course and I thought, oh my God, I'm terrified to do a reading. I'm terrified. I'm terrified. It's so interesting because in the academy or within your Facebook group, you're practicing all the time. Nobody's judging you. And now I don't even think twice about it, Richard. I just read. I don't have any fear around it. And I just, if it resonates, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. But
Mhm.
it always resonates. And I always have to have a box of tissues because
Mhm.
everybody always starts crying.
Yeah, yeah. And
Anyway, and
again,
and it
that's
was
one of
just
the lessons I
beautiful.
carry. I said, you're going to get comfortable. You've got to have to get comfortable with people crying because it will happen. If it makes you
It,
uncomfortable, you've got to get over that.
And that's
Uh,
beautiful. It's just
yeah.
such a beautiful release for them. So, oh my gosh, Richard, it is such a joy to talk to you. You are a delight. And thank you for bringing tarot into my world and opening up my world exponentially. So it's just a pleasure.
Great to talk to you as well. Great to talk to you.
Take
Take care
care.
then.
But bye,
Thank you very much.
Richard. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye.